Welcome back, eReads podcast listeners. It is your host, Liz, and this is my podcast where I talk about books, authorship, and all the different parts of the creative process. And today I'm really excited for you to get to know about Kristina, who is an amazing author. And I'm sure you will glean so much knowledge from some of her strategies. She talks about journaling and all these different aspects that have helped her get closer to her muse and her creative process. So I'm going to go on pause so we can jump right in and get to know a little bit more about her. Kristina, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. It's so nice to meet you and speak to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited. You have so many cool things about you that I want to pick your brain about. So, but before I put you in the hot seat, I'll start with what I call a bookish question, which is just something light and fun in regards to books. So are you ready?
Sure.
All right. So we're talking about writing and healing, and it made me think of is there a book that just left you feeling inspired? You walk away from some books and you're just like, oh yeah, something clicked.
Honestly, the first thing I think of is Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. I'm not sure if you're too familiar with it, but it's a journey of getting to know yourself. I would say it's like self-realization and self-actualization through writing. It's a spiritual journey of writing. And one of the principles that she taught is the act of morning pages. So it's writing 3 pages of longhand writing every single morning, just whatever comes to you, with no filter, with no inhibitions. Yeah. And to be honest, when I went through that journey and I read her book, that was something that I started incorporating to my life. And the amount of information that came through that really just enlightened me as to what was within me. And that practice really helped me as a writer, because I started to get to know, when I take away everything that's distracting me, whatever, it's oh, I got to go do this, I got to go do that. When you get rid of all of that, the truth of what's going on inside of you has the opportunity to be revealed. And that practice was something that, that book really enlightened me to that. So it's become kind of a foundation to my writing practice and the everyday. So I would say that's, definitely one of the greatest books that it's impacted me as far as healing is concerned.
Oh, I definitely have to check that one out. It sounds really good and really
it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. it sounds really exploratory, and from your book, that's also what you help people do, explore. So please tell us about your book.
Thank you. Yes. So my book is Falling into Fire. It's a fantasy exploration of self through the themes of love, sexuality, relationships, identity, and overcoming traumas through writing. So it is a fantasy, but at the start of the book, we kind of have this very brief picture into Christy, her life. So it's me as a character. We get a brief introduction into her life. She's writing a story that has come to her, and she gets into the fantasy. And through this fantasy, she's able to take on this character whose name is Priella, right? So through this Priella character, we see this part of Christy, and Priella goes through these experiences in the setting of the Garden of Earthly Delights. It's a Renaissance painting by Hieronymus Bosch. And through that setting, with all of its symbolism and all of the tropes within it, Priella is able to overcome some serious events in her life. So it's something that it is exploratory, because while she is in this setting, she asks all these questions, all these things coming to her, like, who am I? What is it that I want? And she's trying to relate to the characters in the setting. And ultimately, they do function as a mirror to my real life, right? So this is based very heavily on my real life. And these characters are kind of caricatures of people in my real life, as well as these part of my psyche, where we ask these questions to really get to the heart of what was going on, particularly in, some of the things kind of touched on in adolescence, young adulthood. Right. There's a lot having to do also with friendships and just relationships, not only with, significant others, but also with family members, with friends. So it is very exploratory in getting to know who she is and what it is that she really wants and what she needs to do in order to achieve that. So
Well, so cool.
I healed so much through writing this book. Even sometimes when I didn't even want to, because I really confronted some of these really hardcore moments in my life, even though it was fantasy, just
Yeah.
to get into that mindset. It was very, if you're familiar, anybody who's familiar with method acting, it was very much that similar kind of process.
Yeah.
So I would put myself into that moment, which I had to recall personal moments in my own life, and it was difficult. There were certain scenes. This initially was my master's thesis turned into a story, but even when it was my thesis and I had to confront this particular scene, it took me like 2 weeks just to even write anything down. And it really goes to show that some moments are harder to confront than others.
Mm.
But I stuck through it. And when it was done, and I turned it into a novel with the help of my publisher and my editor, and it turned into such a beautiful experience for me that even
Yeah.
goes beyond just the creation of a book. Like this truly impacted my life, and it was a way for me to heal, which is, personally what I believe all books should achieve for some way or another. Like I feel like
Absolutely.
every book changes you, whether it
Mm-hmm.
changes your mind or it solidifies your stance on something because it
Yes.
strengthens your resolve. So this book was like that for me. And by sharing my story, it was a way for me to help others who went through something similar, but in a way that was more private than just having the person, let's say, go to therapy.
Right.
Because I know sometimes somebody may or may not be ready, or
Mm-hmm.
they may not even know
Mm-hmm.
that there is something to get over, right? It's a huge step, even for me, having had the experience of therapy. It was very much a journey just to even say certain things out
Right.
loud. It's definitely something that it takes a lot of bravery. And whether or not someone is ready for that or they've already done that, I feel like this book can supplement that healing that you do with others, but in your own mind. So
Mm-hmm.
whether or not you're able to say everything to another person and heal with them and that interdependent
Right.
relationship and type of healing, this is also to add internal healing in the privacy of your mind, reading a story written in first person,
Mm-hmm.
where you can kind of reflect on yourself and kind of challenge what you think about these specific topics that I present. And I believe, it allows the person to just take on that worldview for a minute and play in
Right.
that world to just see what they believe. And if they need healing, this is an opportunity for them to go through that process.
Oh my goodness. It sounds so layered and so deep, and like I have like so many questions.
Oh,
So
thank you. Absolutely. I love questions. I tell people all the time that the question mark is my favorite punctuation mark. Even like, even though like my editor's like statements, Christy, statements. And I'm like, but I have so many questions, so I'm very, I love to, I'm very much into philosophy and psychology, and I truly love questions and getting to know people. So getting to know myself, it was a great journey too. So yeah, ask all the questions.
yeah. So first, I'll start with this statement. Like you talked at the end about like almost how this can accompany therapy or be used before someone is even ready. And
Yeah.
I love that because oftentimes therapists will sometimes refer to books or use books, or sometimes reading will help people be able to identify what's going on with them. And so I always appreciate when folks are able to take their experience and translate that, whether it is into fiction or nonfiction, because I think it just can really help for someone to be like, and I love how you talk about it's in first person so that they can put
Yes.
themselves. And I think that's really clever. Because again, I think it helps people to see like, oh yeah, I went through that, or I felt like that, or yeah, this is putting words to this feeling I couldn't name. So I love all those things. But also,
Thank you.
you talked about this being kind of personal for you, and you were kind of going through things, and you mentioned that it was healing. Was it ever hard? How was it writing something that was so personal?
It was incredibly hard. Like I mentioned, just even the taste of it. while this story was still, I was working on it for my master's thesis, how there were certain days that I couldn't even approach the story. When I was turning into a novel, what helped me a lot, my editor really pushed me to confront certain things. Even though I already had that motivation, between my thesis advisor and later my editor, they really brought certain things to mind. So there's still kind of that
Yeah.
interpersonal kind of assistance there. And what I told myself, I'm like, okay, we've already embarked on this journey. We already know that there's something that needs healing, right? There's
Mhm.
something that needs to be confronted. If I don't confront it, my life stays the same, which was I was in a very
Right.
unhappy, depressive state, right? Because I felt very lost, aimless, and the character goes through that in the story. I'm like, either I stay the same or I get a little bit uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
but I have the chance to heal. So
Yes.
whenever those moments would come where I'm like, I really don't want to go here right now. I really don't want to even talk about this. This is extremely personal. As fantasy as it is, it's going to be pretty clear that this is very, hitting close to home to me. I was like, you know what? Who cares? Like, I went
Mm.
through so much growing up. I'm like, if I just keep this to myself, if I don't take the chance, I'm like, not only like for me on a personal level, like I said, I would stay the same and I wouldn't grow as a person.
Right.
But also, now I'm stopping other people potentially from healing, right? Because if I
Mm-hmm.
have a story to tell and I was given this prompt to share it in this format, that means that there is somebody out there that could benefit from it. Or even
Absolutely.
just me, myself, like this act. But I do offer the opportunity that if other people can resonate with this type of healing, with this type of
Mm-hmm.
writing, it can affect them, right? And I do feel like we're all here to share our message in whatever platform. Like you have a podcast,
Absolutely.
right? You have this very particular task where you get to share your message through this format. For me, I get to share my message through my book, and any kind of writing really, but with this book in particular, I felt the need, I had to share it. So every
Right.
time I had a really tough moment, and I'm like, I don't know. This is horrible to even think about again because I could immediately go back to that memory. Like,
Mm.
even though I was just channeling it, I wasn't directly retelling it.
Mm-hmm.
Just even like a hint of that moment, I was like, wow, this is very impactful. And then I was like, you know what? If it's hitting me that hard,
Right.
confront it even more because there's no way that I'm going to have the life that I want to live if I just hold on to this pain. So I
Yeah.
always say that I love to turn my pain into art, and I feel like
Yeah.
that's what I'm here to do. So I was like, every time it was difficult, it was a challenge. Yeah, maybe it took me a few days. Yeah, maybe it took, I had to like meditate on it, like just get a little bit of space from the story and pray. But I would always come back to it with that,
Mm-hmm.
conviction, like I am
Right.
meant to tell it. So whatever I have to do, I'll go ahead and I would just go for it. So it was difficult, yes, but I just went for it.
Absolutely. And I think I'm sure the reward is on the pages with feeling that I was talking with someone and we're talking about like it's important for you, the writer, the author, to feel that because that's going to translate to the page and like people are going to
Yeah.
feel that. And like you mentioned, like the everyone has a message, whether
Yeah.
that's fiction or nonfiction, and being able to get that to folks for someone else to connect and resonate, whether it's for escapism, for healing, whatever that is. But our words connect with
Absolutely.
others. And so, absolutely, I'm so here for that message. Um,
Yes.
and thinking about kind of like the technicalities of putting the book together, you have a very interesting background in psychology and writing. And I'm going to mess up the last one. It's what is the last degree that you have?
Neurolinguistic programming. I was licensed.
So, how did all of that help? And I'm curious in having a master's in writing, what does that look like? Was that like a really cool experience? Was it hard? Tell us more about that.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit of the journey that kind
Yeah.
of got me there. So, in getting my bachelor's in psychology, what I really wanted to do, I was always fascinated by the mind, always fascinated by why we do the things that we do.
Right.
So I figured psychology is a very logical step into being able to serve people in that way. So I
Mm-hmm.
always loved psychology. I loved learning it. And I remember one day I was working part-time as a receptionist at a law office, and the head attorney there, my boss, he asked me, he's like, "Oh, so what is it that you want to do?" And I was like, "Well, I want to know why people do the things they do. I want to know the reasons for their actions, why people are the way that they are,
Mm-hmm.
so that I can understand them and better help them." And then he literally wrote those three letters, NLP, on a piece of paper. And I was like, I had never heard of it before. So I
Right.
went searching and I actually found the program. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. And something happened, excuse me, where I was able to just sign up for it. I had the means to participate in the certification program. And as I was learning everything, it just all just clicked. Just even as far as how we receive information through our representational systems, whether we are more visual, more auditory, more
Right.
kinesthetic, right? So there is a lot involved in that practice, but those were just even just a hint that, started, it was like a seed, it was planting into my mind. And so I kind of had that background there. And then it was time, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but I didn't exactly know what I wanted to pursue. There was
Right.
a bunch of different psychological programs in different areas. I'm like, oh, what if I had wanted to move to California. I was in Miami, but I was like, I want to go to California. I want to go here. I want to try, this is my chance to kind of branch out. But all of the programs that I was looking at in psychology, there was always something that didn't feel completely aligned. And I was like, well, I don't know. Like there was a little bit of hesitation regarding the specific programs that were available to me at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Then I did like some soul search. I'm like, okay, what is it that I want to do? Who do I want to work with? So I felt really called to work with adolescents
Yeah.
and, so young people and teenagers. And I knew that based on my experiences, I wanted to help others that had gone through some type of abuse, whether it's emotional, sexual,
Right.
physical.
Right.
And then, but as I started thinking about how I was going to do that practically, day in and day out,
Mm-hmm.
I thought to myself, much like being a doctor, because I was also like a part of, I was like, I entertained that for a second, I'm like, pediatrician, maybe, but then I thought about it like, could I be the most effective helping these students, in that therapeutic setting where, I
Right.
worked, let's say, an 8-hour day, seeing clients on a one-on-one basis, day in and day out. And at that particular moment, because I don't want to speak to forever, because obviously as we grow, we evolve, right? But at the
Absolutely.
particular moment, I was so even in my own pain that I'm like, you know what? I don't think I would even be ready for that. I don't think I would be the most effective helping students in that setting.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was like, okay, well, what's something that I've always wanted to do? What's another way that I could share my message?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I also explored even teaching,
Right.
right? But even through
All the helping
teaching,
professionals. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of the, student teacher kind of relationships, or counselor, guide, I loved all of those positions, but there was something not completely clicking.
Mm-hmm.
I've participated in all of them. I've even been a teacher before, but I truly felt called to go just a little bit deeper
Mm-hmm.
into this healing aspect, right?
Right.
So I reflected back on when I was younger, when I was in middle school, and what helped me get through what I was going through at that particular time was it was actually poetry. So I used to love writing poems, and I remember my
Yeah.
teachers kind of commending me for my poetry. And every time I was upset, I would write something. So it was mostly poetry. Sometimes I would write songs. Sometimes, I would just write stories. And I was like, you know what? I love to write. I love books. I know the power of books. Why don't I just dive a little bit deeper into
Mm-hmm.
this particular medium? Let me see
Mm-hmm.
where it can take me. So I ended up finding a writing program nearby. So I live in Miami. The writing program was at Nova Southeastern. So it was just, like 45 minutes away. And it's funny because I had to put together a portfolio. I'm like, okay, so I just kind of put what I put with like all these pictures. I made it, I think on like Mixbook or something. It's, I made it like hardbound, all super cute. I don't know what I was thinking. Instead of just putting like just a text, a document, I made it with pictures and decoration because I love graphics. And funny enough, I applied and then they lost my portfolio. I was like, oh
Stop.
my God. I was like, I went through this whole mission. I called a bunch of people
Yeah.
after all this journey. Like, I just felt called to do it. Like with any other opportunity, I might just be like, oh, it wasn't meant to be. But I don't know. There was something in me that was like, no, you have to find this portfolio. They
Yeah.
need to read your work. So I was able to find it somehow. I called like 7 people. They found it. And they're like, oh, you should just come in. And I ended up speaking to 2 people in the department. And when I was there,
Yeah.
I just felt right. It felt right to be there.
Oh,
So I
wow.
was like, I haven't even been accepted to this program yet, but I just felt right. So I was like, okay, I'm a little unsure. Even people are telling me like, Chris, you didn't study journalism, you didn't study English. What are you thinking? You didn't even write for the newspaper in your high school. Like, you don't have a lot of experience. And I'm like, I don't know. I just have to. So then, I opened my heart to that possibility.
Yeah.
Next thing I know, I was accepted. What I loved about my program, so my particular program was a very intimate program. There wasn't that many students in it. I want to
Right.
say like maybe max 10 or 12. I'm
Oh,
not
that's nice.
exactly sure, but
Yeah.
it was like a workshop format. So
Oh,
the
cool.
classes met once a week and they were for 3 hours. And, whatever you signed up for, the class was like 6 to 8:30, something like that. It was very catered to people that might have
Mm-hmm.
work during the day, more adult education. And we would just sit around a conference table in like desk chairs, and then there was computers around. We had our professor lecturing us, and then it was a workshop. So every single week we had a reading, but we also had a writing assignment, and we had to read each other's work, critique it. So it was very immersive. And through my fiction writing workshop was actually when I first got the idea for the story that became Falling into Fire.
Mm.
So it was actually a short story. And it's interesting because that story, I wrote it in like 8 pages. And I was like, it's done. And the next thing I know, I turned it into 45 pages for my thesis. And then it ended up being almost 200 as a novel.
Oh,
So it's kind of
wow.
interesting, like, even just that journey alone. Like, when I first wrote it as a short story, I'm like, it was inspired by the painting, which was actually shown to me in another class in that
Mm-hmm.
program. It was like an editing class. I don't even know, I can't even tell you why my professor brought up that painting, but he just showed it to us. It had nothing to do with editing. I can't even remember, but it was
Yeah.
like one of those things where like it stuck with me. And through this painting and my interaction with the painting and reaction to it, this story was born. And even just the fact of how it started off as 8 pages and it was done and it turned into so much more, it goes to show like the levels of healing that we go through.
Oh,
Because
wow. That's a good
obviously,
parallel right there. Yeah.
I was obviously able to experience some healing when it was 8 pages. Like, I knew something was happening,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and it's crazy because that first version was very different to what it is now. It was a much more hardcore, you're wrong, you need to purify yourself, like, this is why this happened, because that's all I had heard up until
Right.
that point from everyone around me. Oh, well, if you had done this wouldn't have happened. So
Yeah.
it was a lot of like victim blaming, so to speak, like, and I blamed myself for so much. So my first version was like that, and I was like, oh, it's done, that's it, that's the whole solution. And then when I turned it into my thesis, then things really started unraveling because now I had to make the story longer. That task alone really pushed me. Okay, it's like, okay, we're going to expand here. What can we really look at here? And so my advisor really pushed me to start expanding. And it wasn't just expanding, like descriptions of setting, nothing. It was like, okay, no, what's really happening here? What are the scenes that are going to tell this story? And then that's how my healing really started to unravel. And even just the characters of the
Those are really great
story.
questions too in developing your scene.
Yeah, it's like, what's happening here? What are we trying to say? What are we, what's going on in her mind? What needs to be told? So that's when like the healing got deeper. And interesting enough, one of the greatest changes that I love to mention, because I had this notebook, this little, as a matter of fact, if you want me to bring it, I can bring it. I have this sketchbook where I put all my stuff for my story.
Yeah.
And in it, you want me to go grab it?
Why not?
Okay,
Go ahead.
go grab it. Since we're on this call, I'm totally gonna grab it because I'm gonna share something with you that I think is very important when it comes to the writing journey. So, in the writing journey, as many authors know, there will be changes.
Correct.
Right? So, not everything always stays exactly as we planned it. Things get revealed as we go deeper into the story. So, for anybody watching, for you, this was my sketchbook, and in it, I put all my research and all the little like quotes that I like, and I love pictures. I would highlight everything that I was going through. And when I was making like my character sketches, so I guess most people like do this online, I wanted a physical sketchbook. And the angel in my story, the first name I gave him was Malachi. Now, the reason he was named Malachi is because Malachi is a name, means angel or messenger. And I was like, that's obvious. Done. Little did I know. I remember when I was nearing towards probably like 2/3 of the way in, I remember my thesis advisor telling me, like, why did you name him that? So I told her, and she's like, do you know who Malachi is in the Bible? Now, the reason she brought that up is because there was a lot of religious themes in my story. So she knew like a lot of it was impacted and influenced by my upbringing. So she asked me, do you know who that is in the Bible? And I'm like, as a matter of fact, I totally don't. Like that's one of those things, like it just, I didn't know. And she's like, okay, well, I want you to just like marinate on that. Like go look it up. And I want you to just take a little peek as to his function in, the Old Testament. So I ended up learning that he is, the story of him in the Old Testament is like the last one, I guess, before the New Testament. And to sum it up very shortly, the part that impacted me the most was that he served, as my advisor kind of brought up too, as a warning. Like if you don't get right, bad things are going to happen, right? So it's this very stern, hardcore, you better fix this, because things are happening, right? This is your time to get in line.
What you were talking about with healing.
Yeah, and it was a very strong force. And I remember reading that, I was like, that's like hardcore, like very repent, like you're doing bad, you gotta fix it, repent for your, your mistakes. And I was like, man, that's like really harsh. And then I started reflecting and I'm like, is that really the message that I want to send? Because this angel serves as her guide, as her support system throughout her healing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this really the right person? But then I realized, without even knowing, I gave that character a name that matches the perspective that I had received throughout my life up until that point. That's how strong that influence was, that I even, without even knowing, gave that name to this character. And it did match what I was told before.
Oh, good.
You made that mistake. Yes. That's why people treated you like that. Like, you want to get this result? You want a boyfriend? You got to do X, Y, and Z. You don't have that because of this. And it was very stern growing up. And then I was like, man, like without even knowing, I gave that character that kind of personality. But then I realized, I'm like, that wasn't effective. That's what I've had my whole life. And while it made a lot of sense to me, it wasn't the most effective and truly what I needed in order to have the most effective, strong healing, to actually overcome what I went through. I knew it, but that wasn't the way, right? Yeah. So that wasn't the path I needed to take. So then I ended up changing the angel's name to Michael to match the Archangel Michael. So Archangel Michael, he represents truth and justice. And that's what I really wanted. I was like, okay, even though the Archangel Michael is super hardcore, like as a character, right? And an archetype, he is a very hardcore angel. I was like, the hardcore doesn't bother me. It's what is the message that is being fought for here? So even
That's a
though
really
our
good
kids,
question there. Like, what is
yeah,
the message? Um, because it has so much depth, and I think sometimes with stories we miss that, and like
yeah,
that it really helped you to layer. Like you talked about going from 8 pages to 45 pages. So that
yeah.
as a real, I'm going to write that question down. Like, what is the message here?
That's really what it came down to. And what I really wanted was I wanted to get to the truth. And
Mm,
I wanted justice, as far as, whatever needs to happen is going to happen, right? But I wanted it from a more truthful aspect and more just that kind of personality as opposed to just, you made all these mistakes, fix them. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
Like, it's just the impression. And who knows, like, maybe if I was to read the book of Malachi now, it'd be very different. But, I remember just at that point, that was the message I needed to receive about that. So all of the
Yeah.
characters in my story, I started reflecting on how they were named, how they were being represented, how did they really function in her life and ultimately in mine. And that was a journey even of itself. Like a lot of my story is the characters and the dynamics with each other, more so than just, the plot of the story. She goes from here to
Yeah.
here. Like the most important aspect is her relationship, Priella's relationship with the other characters as well as with herself, and they all serve as mirrors to her. So it was intense, but I love it.
Absolutely. And I wanted to say, like, when you brought out like your sketchbook, and thinking about your background in neuro linguistic programming, I got it that
Yes. Yes, you totally
and
do.
thinking
Yes.
and thinking about the different ways that people learn and having that visual,
Yeah.
I'm sure is very effective. And I was thinking today actually about having like a novel vision board, right? Where you get to like see, and at least for me, I know that would be really helpful to have those visuals. So I might
Yes.
play around it and do that, because I can imagine that being really helpful to having that depth and really having that exploration. Um,
Yes.
Kristina, before I ask you to share where folks can get your book, um, kind of a question that I have, because there's so much tied to like your personal healing and your personal journey. And like sometimes we can see folks, or at least like I have seen folks sometimes take their life story and just turn it into a novel, but then it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't resonate with people. Is there anything, or like, that you felt like you did, or that you would love for people to know, so that they can take their story from just being their healing journey to being something that can help someone else?
That was also a big part of my journey, was how to tell my story and in what genre.
Yeah.
So even though it really was inspired by this painting and this story came out, I've kind of grappled with that idea. Should I turn it into a memoir?
Right.
And, especially after I wrote my thesis, I was like, okay, turning into a novel. Should I keep, should I leave it as fantasy? Should I turn it into nonfiction? And to be honest, with this very particular story in that particular time that I was writing it, I firmly believe that it had to be fantasy. I think that sometimes when we heal, there is a benefit to having some kind of detachment, where we
Right.
can look at things objectively. We can, even though it is a very subjective experience, and I totally inserted myself into it, and it was a constant kind of battle with myself. There were certain things that I could not have done with my
Right.
story had it been memoir. One of the main things that I accomplished by making it fantasy was particularly with the character Jonah. So Jonah serves as like her main love interest in this story. Now, these characters, have characteristics of people in my real life, but that particular character, he serves more as a caricature, a mixture, combination, conglomerate. I don't even know what word. I remember using that word for a bunch of people in my life. So he represents a mixture and a pattern. So these events that happened in my life, it was a pattern, which
Right.
it almost makes it worse because they were not isolated events. Like it wasn't like, oh, this just happened here and I'm dealing with it. Like that would be a different story. What I noticed in my particular life was it was just a pattern, and it wasn't even always a big event. Sometimes it was just a moment. This man tried me in this way, whether it was, he physically grabbed my hand and made me do something I didn't want to do,
Mm-hmm.
or they would grab me, or they would say something. So in that particular, moment where I had to decide how am I going to tell this, I'm like, okay, do I need to just go moment by moment talking about these different men in my life? Or can I tell it another way?
Mm-hmm.
And at that particular moment, I'm like, you know what? It really doesn't matter what these men did or who these men particularly were. What mattered the most was how I received it, and the destruction and the trauma that I had to overcome. Because at the end
Absolutely.
of the day, when I think about these events, particularly with my experience, I kind of, speak to other people's experience, but with mine, a lot of these guys in my life were guys that I liked. They were had a connection with, like, and I was young, like there was this pressure, like, and that's why, like, even though I don't touch on it too deeply in the story, there was a lot of societal pressures, cultural pressures,
Mm-hmm.
what is a man supposed to do? How is a
Right.
woman supposed to be? And it was those perceptions, which is this is where like the NLP comes in, like those
Mm.
beliefs kind of informed my actions. But at the end of the day, in many times, I wanted to say no, but I couldn't say no. So
Right.
then this pain was a result,
Mm.
so it's very complex, these situations that would happen. And at the moment, I'm like, you know what? Just going one by one, talking about these different guys at this time is not going to
Right.
function the best way for me to heal. What I need to do is, okay, I'm going to touch on these things that happened, maybe highlight some moments, but what really matters is how I received it, because that's what I needed to heal. Not
Mm.
necessarily if the guy was interested in me and he made a move, right? Which, I was
Which,
uncomfortable with, whatever.
yeah.
That's a whole different story,
Which
that we can talk
also,
about.
yeah,
Hmm?
which also, like, in thinking about, again, like you're talking about first person and your character, really thinking about how is she experiencing that. And I think sometimes in reading, right, we try and give too many perspectives, and like,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about these things, like you talked about, like how you internalized it, how you felt it, like that's the story. Absolutely.
Exactly. And that's what I really wanted to touch on,
Yeah.
because that was what the problem was.
Right.
So at that particular time, when I was that age writing the story for the first time, the memoir autobiography route, I couldn't even talk about it that way. That was the thing too. Like,
Mm.
not only did I feel like it wasn't the best route, I could not talk about it that way because it was very hard for me to confront. So having this fantasy and diving into a painting and thinking
Right.
about life, like it gave me the opportunity to look at these things and kind of meet me where I was at
Right.
emotionally, so that I can get stronger to really hit hard with these, deeper themes. Had I just gone on it head on and just wrote a memoir, like straight, like, all right, cool, this was my experience, guys, this is what I went through at that age, like, because yeah, I started writing this in like my mid 20s or early
Mhm.
20s. At that age, I could not do that. Like,
Right.
they wasn't even coming out, but through fiction, through fantasy, it did. And so I think that for some people that, let's say for me, I wasn't even ready to see a therapist at that point.
Right.
I wasn't able to tell my story in any kind of way. So I think that that genre was very much a gift to me, to
Mm.
just slowly dip my toes into the water of healing,
Right.
to then slowly build my resolve and then dive into my story. And then it turned into what it is now. Do I think I could write memoir later? Yes, I think there's a lot of power in that. And I actually do want to write a nonfiction version, um,
Oh, that would be so
kind of,
cool.
yeah, and kind of just telling the journey of this book, even just the story about turning Malachi into Michael for the
Mhm.
name. That's
Oh,
a huge,
absolutely. I would love to, like,
yeah,
read that up. Well,
so that's definitely part of the book.
speaking of upcoming projects, this time for real, before you tell us where you can get your book, is there any upcoming projects or any upcoming things for you?
Well, I have actually dived a little bit into creating a course to help other people do the same thing that
Cool.
I did with my book. That's something that I am exploring because I do really want to help. In a coaching capacity, I want to be able to help others who want to do something similar to what I did, which was, overcoming traumas and revealing their truth through a story. But apart from that, it might be time to talk about the process, right? The nonfiction version where I'm talking essentially what I've been sharing with you today. Um, I would like to explore that. A lot has been coming through ever since I published this book. So
Yeah.
now it's just a matter of getting organized, seeing what is ready to be told. But yeah, I do think I am working on a course that I would like, to be able to share, or even just, maybe not in a course format, but just helping people one on one who want to achieve something similar. But
Fantastic.
I am working on sharing the process of how this book came out because I feel like there's a lot. The story goes beyond itself. It really is the process to me that was, most impactful. So I just want to share it.
Absolutely. And, thank you
Thank
for,
you.
giving us that behind the scenes. You can tell there was a lot of love and thought poured into this, as well as a lot of your journey and healing. And so thank you for being vulnerable and open. And
Thank
please
you.
share how can folks, go and pick up this book?
Thank you. So, yes, my book is available. You can order it online through either Barnes& and Noble or Amazon, but it's available wherever books are sold. But the hardcover is at Barnes& and Noble. And then if you want paperback, it's also on Kindle Unlimited. So you can order the book through there.
Nice. And how can folks connect to you, whether like website or social media information?
So anywhere on the internet, pretty much, I go by Kristy Smeriglio. So that's my handle on all my social medias. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, pretty much all of them, TikTok. And then my website is kristysmeriglio.com. So on that website, you can see my portfolio. And also, I have a blog where I love to share my thoughts. I'm very much stream of consciousness writer. So I do love to share my thoughts, some of which, I've touched on a little bit in my story, but more on a day-to-day kind of basis. So people can see some more of my writing there as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kristina, for stopping by
Thank
and sharing
you.
all of your experience. Is there anything else you want to leave folks with? Any last words?
Honestly, I would just say if you have a story in you or if you've overcome anything, like just know that you really can do anything you set your mind and heart to. And I always motivate people to write their story. It doesn't matter that there's a million, thousand, billion books, like it's innumerable how many books there are out there. There is nothing like sharing your story. So I
Absolutely.
always encourage people to share their story because, I want to hear it. I love to know. I love people and I want to hear people's stories. So if anyone else is motivated to whether share in the same format that I did or just in another way, I always encourage people to write. So that's what I
Fantastic.
would
Thank
say.
you again
Go
so
for
much
it.
for stopping by and sharing. Kristina, thank you so very much. Oh, and y'all, if you missed any of her socials, it'll be on the episode show notes, so make sure you go and check that out. Kristina, you have
Thank
a
you.
lovely rest of your day, and thank you. And when you have this course out, come on back and tell us all about it.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on your show.